Hi guys, is it too early for Fool of the Week? So Channel 4 interviewed Dr. James Orr, an associate professor at the University of Cambridge, who, if you can believe it, is a friend of the US Vice President J.D. Vance. Still a friend, it seems, even after the Republican politician insulted Britain and its allies. Anyway, he attempted to excuse the behaviour of the Vice President, and it was more embarrassing than a student trying to get away with using ChatGPT to write their dissertation. This was an absolute car crash. Have a listen.
He is smart, but he's also angry. But I'm talking about civility, or rather the lack of civility, in something like dealing with, President Zelensky in the Oval Office. And he's, defended his nation from Russian aggression. And here's J.D. Vance basically, assaulting him in the Oval Office verbally.
Look, I will simply say that in the 6 or 7 years I've known him, I have never known him lose his temper once. He's personally very equitable.
But he did that.
And in that, look, we all lose our temper. Very easy to lose one's temper.
Particularly the Oval Office?
Well, I think it was unwise.
Choose your moment.
I think you're probably right that it was unwise for an important trilateral conversation or bilateral conversation between the Ukraine, between Zelensky and Trump-Vance to be conducted in the Oval Office. And you could see through.
It was a mistake. Who was in charge of that discussion? Who was responsible for that discussion? It was the US administration. Zelensky went to the US. It's not that Trump came to Ukraine along with Vice President J.D. Vance, and then it was Zelensky that messed up. It was the Trump administration that organized that discussion. They didn't have to do that. They could have had a discussion behind closed doors. But Donald Trump and J.D. Vance deliberately planned to attack Zelensky.
Throughout the conversation, that Zelensky was pushing, as you would expect him to. He's pushing for his country. Yeah. He is a national conservative too. He's pushing for his nation's interests. Nothing wrong with that. But he went into the conversation, I think he was badly briefed.
This was a key moment there, wasn't it? And your friend didn't come out of it in the minds of many people around the world looking any better for it.
It was a key moment.
What would you tell Vance down the phone if he rang you up and asked you about that? Would you say, JD, you went too far? Or would you say, fantastic?
No, I certainly wouldn't. It was not my place to tell him how to conduct himself.
You're a friend of his.
I'm a friend of his, and it is the duty of friends to be critical where necessary. Right.
What does this tell us about this individual? J.D. Vance was clearly a bully in that situation. He was bullying a world leader. And remember, Zelensky's first language is not English. So add that to that. J.D. Vance and US President Donald Trump, their first language is English. So they were at an advantage there. They were speaking to somebody who in a language that isn't their first language. And they were bullying him in a situation where they were in charge of that situation. It was on their turf. It was in their sphere of influence, the White House. So they were in charge of the situation. And they continued to bully him. And this guy is saying, well, I'm still a friend of this bully. What does this say about James?
He's also the Vice President of the United States.
But he's also quite mean, isn't he? I mean, the stuff he said in Greenland about the Danes was just mean. It was impolitic. It was uncivil. This, the stuff that he said to the Europeans at Munich, that's mean.
The question is, to what extent have they been good friends and allies? And I think the remarks in Greenland were, look, has Denmark really been doing everything that it can to take seriously
the Greenlanders, all 57,000 of them, who, by the way, don't want to become America's 51st state. In Canada, in case Canada should decline that offer.
And Vance was very clear that that is a matter for the Greenlanders. He was very...
How can you defend this? How can anyone defend this? J.D. Vance went to Greenland against instructions of the administration in Greenland. Donald Trump has continually talked about turning Canada into the 51st state, about annexing Canada. And this guy's anger, well, if you can call it anger, his disagreement, is directed at the people of Greenland and probably an extension, Canada. These Canada in particular is a better ally to the United Kingdom than the US is at the moment. But the problem is not the United States. No, the problem is Greenland, the problem is Canada, the problem is Europe, the problem is the United Kingdom in this guy's eyes. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's what we have to extrapolate from what he's saying.
Very clear in those pronouncements at the press conference.
Do you see J.D. Vance as the future president of the United States?
Yes, I do.
You do? You think he'll be elected in the next election?
My sense is he is dead set to be a Republican candidate. I think what Team Trump recognized that was, Vance was the future of MAGA, that if we want Trumpism to persist beyond Trump, then he's our man.
Dr. James Orr, Associate Professor of the Philosophy of Religion at Cambridge University. Thanks very much for letting us talk to you in your home.
Great to be with you.
These are the types of people we're dealing with. Making excuses for an opponent. Could we go as far as to say that Donald Trump is now an enemy of Europe, an enemy of the United Kingdom? Maybe that's a bit of a stretch at the moment, but it's certainly going in that direction. What I think is interesting is also he said here about how J.D. Vance will be the next president. There may not be an election. This is how far down the road of fascism the United States is going. There may not be an election in 2028. There may be an appointment. So Donald Trump is no longer capable of being president. The Republican Party, the MAGA, decide, actually, what we're going to do is we're just going to appoint J.D. Vance. And Donald Trump will linger around in the background. This is a plausible situation. Now, will the UK continue to maintain some sort of special relationship with the United States in that scenario? Would this guy still be friends with J.D. Vance if he's a dictator? I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but we're certainly seeing the roots of that situation at the moment. Donald Trump is ignoring rulings from the Supreme Court. Donald Trump is deporting people illegally. He's no longer respecting due process. Does James here have a problem with that? Would James have a problem with J.D. Vance ignoring the Supreme Court and not respecting due process? Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.